Assalamu alaikum, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this second day of the ninth annual Gulf Studies Forum organized by Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. I would like to thank the Arab Center for organizing this event and for the kind invitation to partake in this annual forum. And I would also like to thank Dr. Marwan Kabalan for giving particular attention to these topics and events and studies and researches and the academic cooperation and the cooperation in the field of research. Sabah al khair.
To see you here. I will be speaking maybe in many languages, so we'll keep switching between them. And I can say as well, Ohayo gozaimasu, yokoso, and arashimashita. And it's a real, we'll stick to English after this. So it's a real pleasure to have everybody here, and I hope you've enjoyed yesterday. It was a very, very insightful beginning to the conference with many topics that were discussed about the implication of the Ukraine crisis on the region and beyond. So today we're going to be talking about the relationship between Japan and the Middle East, the Gulf states, but also the implication of the Ukraine crisis on this relationship and how it's affected positively or negatively. And of course, we would like to welcome at the very beginning His Excellency, the Japanese ambassador, who kindly joined us here. Thank you, Your Excellency, for joining us. As you know, the Ukraine crisis, besides the the large human cost and the destruction that it has created to the whole world, as it were, it has also other implications that we have not yet been able to even understand the significance of these implications. And as the war and the conflict continues, the more severe implications we are likely to have. Not to say, some of these implications are already there. One of them is, of course, the energy crisis that we will be discussing most of that today, but also food crisis. There is also, economic implications, financial crisis, etc. And as long as this conflict continues, it's going to affect not only the West and Russia, but also it has repercussions on the whole region. Japan, as you know, is the third largest economy in the world, very important economy globally, but also very important for the Middle East, for the Arab world, and we have very strong economic, energy, technological, trade relations, cultural relations with Japan. It's a multifaceted relations, as you will hear from some of the speakers. And it's one of these countries that has been badly affected by this crisis, not to least it's in its energy security. Japan is one of the countries that relies almost totally on imported energy, and particularly from the Middle East. It doesn't have much in terms of its own local energy resources, so it has to almost import everything. I think its energy resources, internal energy resources, something like 11% or so, but the rest comes from abroad. And as you know, Japan has been hit by disasters as well, and it had affected its nuclear capacity to produce energy. So today we are going to be discussing Japan and the Arab world. I don't want to go for too long. We just want to say that this is this panel today is, we are lucky to have 4 prominent speakers who will explore this relationship from different angles, and I will introduce them as we go. But I also wanted to add that this is today's session is part of ongoing strategic relations that we are building between Waseda University in Japan and the Arab Center here at the Doha Institute to focus more on Japan and the Arab world, Japan and the Middle East. And we are hoping that this is going to continue into a much more deeper cooperation and research cooperation between the 2 institutions, leading to further publication and dissemination of knowledge that we are hope to do. And we look forward for that, and hopefully we will be having an event here in Doha, an event in Tokyo at some point. So thanks for the Arab Center, for the Doha Institute, for the people who work behind this team, for all their support and therefore interest in this region. Or in this topic. So quickly, we will move to the speakers. We have 4 distinguished speakers, all from Japan. I will pretend to be Japanese for some time, but my Japanese is still very limited. I'm still learning. So we're going to have 4 different presentations. We'll try and be quick because we don't have much time. So we can give more time for the Q&A. And without much ado, let me introduce the first speaker. And the way that I have organized them is a little bit different from what you have in the paper, because I just want someone to set the scene. And here we are going to go with our first speaker, who's on my right, Kazuo Matsuda, who is a graduate student at the Gulf Studies Center at Qatar University, and also at Sofia University in Japan, with very extensive diplomatic and research experience in various environments, including Japan, the UK, and Qatar. He received his MA in International Relations from the University of Edinburgh in the UK, and he's writing his thesis on the impact of hydrocarbons on intra-Arab Gulf relations since 1973. He is going to be discussing Japan-Gulf states relations, or talking about Japan-GCC relations, discussing the Japanese government's perspective through the lens of energy diplomacy. He's going to be setting the scene, and then we will follow to go to His Excellency, the ex-ambassador to Qatar, but I will introduce him when the time comes, who unfortunately could not join us because for medical reasons, but he's going to join us online. And then the other 2 colleagues, I'll introduce them as we go. So the floor is yours. 15 minutes or shorter.
Good morning, everyone. Is the mic on? Okay. Good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to express my gratitude to the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies for organizing this forum. Special thanks go to Dr. Abdullah for inviting me to join this panel. I would also like to acknowledge that this research is related, in part, to the research project on Japan-Gulf relations led by Dr. Nikolai Kozhanov at the Gulf Studies Center in Qatar University. It is an honor to take part in this panel with the distinguished speakers and our chair, Dr. Abdullah Baabood. Japan has traditionally relied heavily on the GCC states for its oil imports. The latest official data says that the country depended on 92% of its oil imports from these states in 2021. My paper, titled Japan GCC States Relations, discussing the Japanese government's perspective through the lens of energy diplomacy, offers a historical analysis of Japan GCC states relations between the late 20th century and the 21st century from the perspective of the Japanese government and through the lens of Japan's energy diplomacy. Why this analytical approach? Because this analytical lens and scope serve to contextualize these relations within Japan's broader energy diplomacy in times of energy crisis. In so doing, it offers important policy implications for the future relations between Japan and the GCC states in light of the Ukraine crisis, which is, of course, the session's main theme. In particular, my paper aims to shed light on the Japanese government's agency in formulating Japan's political and economic approach vis-à-vis the GCC states. It does so by qualitatively comparing Tokyo's policy responses to major energy crises during two different time periods, the 1970s and the first part of the 21st century. My main argument is that unlike the 1970s oil shocks, a series of shocks and threats to Japan's energy landscape during the early 21st century led the Japanese government to assume increasingly greater leadership in formulating Japan's political and economic approaches towards the GCC states. This was done to achieve Japan's greater energy security. This policy orientation is exemplified by the Japanese government's recent launch of public-private partnership platforms, something which the country lacked previously, to effectively coordinate the country's collective relationship building approach with these GCC states. Through reviewing the existing literature on Japan-GCC states relations, it became overt that the body of literature on this topic remains limited, despite their growing ties over the past decades. That said, my literature review elucidates the existence of at least three analytical tendencies. First, the existing literature, particularly the ones written in English, tends to focus on the GCC states' perspective rather than that of the Japanese government. This is exemplified by discussions of the GCC states' so-called Look East policy or pivot to Asia, which refers to, as you all know, they're turning from the West to the East to find greater economic cooperation in the 21st century. Second, the existing literature often looks at the evolving nature of the relations, discussing how their ties have been morphing from mere hydrocarbon trade relations into multifaceted linkage in recent years. Third, the Japanese government is sometimes depicted as a passive actor in its relationship building with the GCC states. However, as I will demonstrate, the Japanese government's energy diplomacy vis-à-vis these states is becoming increasingly proactive, particularly recent years. Notably, the existence of these analytical preferences has caused the Japanese government's agency in formulating the country's political and economic approach towards the GCC states to be relatively overlooked. This observation clarifies the need to shed light on this particular subject, which is done through, as I said, qualitative and comparative analysis of its agency between the late 20th century and the 21st century. In the 1970s, Japan experienced two oil shocks. The first was in 1973, following the Arab oil embargo, and the second between 1979 and 1980, after the Iranian Revolution and OPEC oil production cuts caused an oil price surge. The impact of these oil shocks on Japan's oil imports, for which Japan heavily relied on the Gulf states, was limited. Nevertheless, the oil shocks highlighted the vulnerability of Japan's energy security. However, these oil shocks did not necessarily convince the Japanese government to deepen its political and economic ties with the Gulf states. Instead, these shocks pushed the Japanese political elite to seek ways to diversify Japan's energy sources away from Gulf oil to enhance its energy security. This is evidenced by the Japanese government's primary policy responses to the oil shocks, namely, one, geographic diversification of oil dependence away from the Gulf states. This included the Japanese government's government-to-government agreements with China, Indonesia, and Mexico. Two, development of alternative energies, such as nuclear power. And three, improvement of domestic energy efficiency to reduce oil imports. These efforts led to the temporary reduction of Japan's oil dependency on the Gulf states. However, by the end of the century, Japan's oil dependency rate on the Gulf states had nearly returned to its pre-1970s level. Hence, from the Japanese government's perspective, the enhancement of political and economic ties with the Gulf states was not a policy priority amid the oil shocks of the late 20th century, as well as the country's heavy reliance on Gulf oil continued. However, this policy orientation started to change, following a wave of shocks and threats on Japan's energy landscape in the 21st century. During the first part of this century, a wave of shocks and threats hit Japan's energy landscape. These shocks and threats included: one, the loss of oil concessions from the Saudi side of Khafji oil field in 2000. Two, the so-called Abu Dhabi shock of 2009, which refers to the Japan-US consortium's defeat by the South Korean consortium in a bid to construct a nuclear power plant in the UAE. Three, the shutdown of 54 nuclear power plants following the Fukushima nuclear power plant incident in 2011. And four, China's increasing presence in areas such as Japan's oil import sea lane stretching between Japan and the Gulf region. These factors reminded the Japanese political elite of the strategic importance of the GCC states for ensuring the stable inflow of oil into Japan. As the Japanese government increasingly realized the relevance of strong political and economic ties with the GCC states to the country's energy security, it was arguably this realization, among other political and economic calculations, that drove the Japanese government to assume greater leadership over political and economic approaches vis-à-vis these states. Enhanced ties with the GCC states could not be achieved by the Japanese government or the public sector alone. It required the Japanese private sector's participation and contribution. But by the end of the 2000s, Japan lacked public-private partnership platforms to coordinate collective political and economic approaches towards the GCC states. Japan's Agency for Natural Resources and Energy, a government body in charge of the country's energy policy, admitted that Japan's relationship building with the Middle Eastern countries had long been conducted individually by each government institution and private company. However, over the past 10 years or so, the Japanese government has been proactively creating such platforms to effectively coordinate Japan's collective political, economic approaches towards these states. These platforms include 1, the Japan Arab Economic Forum, 2, the LNG Producer Consumer Conference, and 3, the Council for Cooperation with the Middle East oil-producing countries. Although I will not delve into the details of these platforms due to time constraints, what is common among them is that all of them are meant to foster Japan's one-team approach towards the GCC states. This one team includes the Japanese government, relevant semi-government institutions, think tanks, and private companies. What is important here is that the Japanese government's launch of these public-private partnership platforms in recent years shows its growing leadership and increasingly proactive agency in guiding Japan's collective approaches towards the GCC states. This is primarily to ensure the stable inflow of Gulf oil into Japan. Given these findings, it can be argued that unlike the 1970s oil shocks, the energy shocks and threats of the early 21st century pushed the Japanese government to assume an increasing leadership role in formulating Japan's political and economic approaches vis-à-vis the GCC states for the sake of the greater energy security. As I pointed out, this is evidenced by the Japanese government's successful launch of public-private partnership platforms over the past 10 years or so. Lastly, these findings provide a research implication for future Japan-GCC states relations in light of the current Ukraine crisis. The crisis, which led to the disruption of the global hydrocarbon market, sent yet another reminder to the Japanese political elite about the strategic importance of the GCC states for the country's energy security. This will add to the Japanese government's increasing willingness to strengthen its cooperation with the GCC states. And the public-private partnership platforms elucidated in this study may well serve to accelerate this policy orientation. I hope my presentation sets the stage for the following presentations by the distinguished panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kazuo-san. That was quite an interesting background to the relationship and how it started and how it's evolving. Thank you for providing that background and also explaining something about the public-private partnership initiative that Japan is following. There is strong potential for this relationship to grow further, but unfortunately, like many of our Middle East and Arab relations with other global powers, it is underutilized in many ways. So thank you very much for that. Kazuto-san. Let's now go to Tokyo, and will join us online, and sadly, because he couldn't join us physically, Kazuo Sunaga, who is, I think, already online. Kazuo Sunaga is specially appointed as Senior Fellow at Japan National Institute for Defense Studies. He was appointed Japanese ambassador to Qatar in 2019, and he has substantial political expertise in Japanese foreign policy towards ASEAN and the Arab Gulf states. He published Qatar Wisdom to Live Through Turbulences in the Middle East, which was published in the Journal of Middle Eastern Studies in 2021. And he also works on Japan. He's going to be talking to us about Japan foreign policy towards the Arab Gulf states in the light of the Ukrainian crisis. Sunaga-san, the
Hello.
floor is yours.
Hello, thank you. Good morning, Dr. Abdullah Baabood. Thank you very much for a very kind introduction. It is an honor for me to speak at the forum. I would like to thank everyone who has made this forum possible. First of all, I must apologize. A week ago, I tested positive for COVID-19, so I couldn't come to Doha. I'm very sorry for that. Having said that, let me start my presentation. I will start my presentation what is happening in Ukraine. Russia's aggression against Ukraine has undermined the very foundation of the international law and order. Instead of continuing diplomatic efforts, Russians decided to use their force to expand their own sphere of influence. The Russia's invasion has targeted the civilians, resulting in a serious humanitarian crisis. It has also triggered sharp increases in the price of oil, natural gas, and foods, and other products, inflicting a serious impact on economies around the world, which are already plagued by COVID-19. But tensions are rising not only in Europe, but also in East Asia and other many parts of the world. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said at the IISS Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore this year, Ukraine today may be East Asia tomorrow. Indeed, in Asia, there are attempts to unilaterally change the status quo, violating the international law, such as the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So let me first give you a quick overview of the Japanese diplomacy toward the Gulf countries. The Gulf region is important for Japan for three main reasons. First, the Gulf region is a major supplier of crude oil and natural gas for Japan. Japan is currently attempting to diversify its energy resources, but I think Japan's energy policy will undoubtedly remain heavily dependent on the Gulf region in the foreseeable future. The second, the Gulf region is an attractive destination for the products and investments from Japan. In addition, the major cities like Doha and Dubai have become very attractive as a tourist destination, hosting many cultural, sports, and entertainment events. The third, the Gulf region is located on a maritime route from East Asia to the Middle East. So maintaining peace and security in this region is essential for Japan to ensure the free and safe trade, as well as people-to-people exchanges, not only with Middle East, but also with Europe and Africa. With these reasons in mind, the Japanese leaders have cultivated friendly and cooperative relations with Gulf countries. ties in energy sector is particularly strong, underpinning Japan's entire relations with the Gulf countries. On the other hand, Japan's major concern is that the conflict or tensions elsewhere in the Middle East will adversely affect the stability of the Gulf region, which in turn may undercut stable economic. Typical examples are two oil crises of the 1970s. Therefore, Japan is making various diplomatic efforts to reduce tensions in the region. For example, regarding the Iran's nuclear issue, Japan is consistently supporting the JCPOA. In August 2021, the last year, then Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi became the first foreign dignitary from a major country to visit Iran. After the inauguration of President Ibrahim Raisi, during his trip, he met with the president and the other key members of the new government of Iran to discuss the nuclear issue. Regarding the Middle East peace, Japan continues to support the two-state solution and is implementing confidence-building measures and economic assistance to Palestinians. Japan is also strengthening defense cooperation to ensure the maritime security, including the freedom of navigation in the Gulf region. For example, Japan's defense forces have participated in the activities to protect passing vessels from piracy in the Gulf of Aden and off the coast of Somalia for more than 10 years. Having said that, I believe that dialogue and cooperation in the field of diplomacy and security between Japan and the Gulf countries still remain to be strengthened, commensurate with the scale of economic cooperation. This is probably because both Japan and the Gulf countries mainly look at United States or European countries when it comes to the dialogue on important security issues. But given the growing importance of Asia and the Gulf region in the rapidly interconnected or multipolar world, Japan and Gulf countries will need to enhance the direct dialogue and cooperation beyond trade and investment. So Japan's Free and Open Indo-Pacific, or we call it FOIP, will serve as a good conceptual platform for that. The FOIP was put forward by former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in August 2016. Its objective is to ensure peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region by achieving a free and open order based on the common values and principles, such as the rule of law. Japan is promoting following three policies to realize the aims of FOIP. The first policy is to promote and consolidate the rule of law. Japan places particular importance on the principles of a maritime order, such as the freedom of navigation. Japan is also playing a leading role in rulemaking for free trade, including the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement on Trans-Pacific Partnership, or CPTPP, and the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or RCEP. The RCEP is expected to make a considerable contribution to the economic development of Indo-Pacific because it is the first legal framework which encompasses major economies in Asia, namely the Japan, China, and the Republic of Korea. And the second policy is to improve the connectivities, such as transportation, communication, ICT, and energy transmissions. Japan is providing a considerable amount of public and private financial resources for this purpose. A key concept is quality infrastructure investment. This concept is based on the recognition that infrastructure projects which seem attractive in terms of initial cost may end up undermining the entire economy of the countries concerned if they don't take into account the long-term costs associated with maintenance and operation, as well as with debt repayment. The third policy is ensuring peace and security, which include maritime security, cyber counter-piracy, and natural disasters. Japan's Ministry of Defense and Self-Defense Forces are engaged in a defense dialogue and cooperation with many countries in the Pacific region. As a FOIP encompasses a vast region and covers many areas of cooperation, it makes possible broad cooperation with partners which share the same principles and ideas. Now the partnerships are expanding beyond Indo-Pacific. ASEAN, for example, adopted in 2019 the ASEAN version of Indo-Pacific, which is called ASEAN Outlook of the Indo-Pacific. And the Quad, which is composed of Japan, the United States, Australia, and India, are also deepening cooperation. EU also intends to strengthen its commitments to the Indo-Pacific. And I hope that the Gulf countries will be more interested in FOIP as well, because the balance of power is changing in the Pacific, making the region more unstable. And this trend may be aggravated by Russian aggression against Ukraine. So there is a little question that Japan and the Gulf countries will need to strengthen dialogue at various levels to safeguard the rule of law and promote free trade in the Indo-Pacific. Now I come to the economic relations with Gulf countries. Japan has been building an excellent complementary economic ties with Gulf countries. But now, as the world economy is rapidly evolving and the competition among Asian countries are intensifying over the oil and gas and investment in the Gulf region. So there is a pressing need for Japan to upgrade its economic relations with the Gulf countries to be more multi-layered. The burgeoning of such cooperation can be seen in the area of SDGs, including climate change measures. The war in Ukraine reminded us of the importance of a Gulf region for their rich fossil energy resources, but climate change measures will likely accelerate in the long run. Japan and Gulf countries are no exception. For example, Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, or METI, hosted the Asian Green Growth Partnership Ministerial meeting on October last year, which was attended by Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, and Kuwait. New business deals related to blue ammonia and hydrogen are now underway between Japan and the Gulf countries. So the potential for cooperation is not small. Lastly, as I was Japanese ambassador to Qatar until last October, I want to briefly touch upon Japan-Qatar relations. In my view, Qatar is a rare country in the world that has overcome a number of crises and has come to exert its influence in the world in ways that are hard to imagine given its geographical and demographical size. For example, Qatar successfully navigated the blockade instigated by Saudi Arabia, UAE, and others. During that process, Qatar has even enhanced its economic resilience and diplomatic power. Qatar played an indispensable role during the Afghan crisis last year. The government of Japan is very grateful that the government of Qatar and Qatar Air helped to return more than 500 people from Afghanistan to Japan. In addition, there are many ambassadors, including Japanese ambassador, who evacuated from Kabul, set up their temporary offices in Doha. Indeed, Qatar demonstrated its diplomatic power in such a challenging time. The war in Ukraine again highlighted the importance of Qatar in the world economy and world politics. Now, this year, Japan and Qatar are celebrating the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations. Japan and Qatar have enjoyed an excellent relationship since Japan became the first country in the world to import LNG from Qatar. But as I said, the world is rapidly changing, and Qatar is now considered one of the major powers. So it is quite natural to assume that the relationship between Japan and Qatar may not evolve in the same way as the last 5 decades. So fortunately, the first Japan-Qatar strategic conference was held in Doha last year. Both foreign ministers agreed to deepen the relationships to cover not just political and economic fields, but also health, environment, education, and culture, and other sectors as well. So the horizon of cooperation is still wide open. For example, the Qatar is committed to transforming itself into an advanced and sustainable nation by integrating cutting-edge technologies around the world. I believe that in this strategy, there is a strong affinity with the concept of quality infrastructure investment of Japan. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for us to work together. However, there is one caveat. The caveat is that the aspect of Qatar I have just described are not well known among the general public in Japan. Perhaps the Qatar's progress is so fast that the perception of most of Japanese is running behind. This kind of time difference, so to speak, will likely resolve itself. So we don't need to take it so seriously. Nevertheless, as public opinion carries a heavy weight in Japanese diplomacy, it is necessary for the governments, academia, and the businesses of both countries to make efforts to close the gap. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sunaga-san. We're really very sorry that you could not join us here physically, but we hope that you recover quickly from the COVID, the nasty COVID, and hope to see you soon, hopefully in Tokyo or in Qatar in the future. Also, thank you for extending the debate that the relationship between Japan and the Middle East that's normally being looked at as just energy dependent, you're extending it to other aspects that includes economics, cultural issues, and I'm sure this is something that will come up in the discussions later on. And you also talked briefly about the relationship with Qatar, and I'm sure our colleagues here will also add to that, and maybe we take some of that in the discussions later. But let me first move very quickly to our third distinguished speaker here, Koichiro Tanaka, who is a professor at the Graduate School of Media and Governance at Keio University, and he's the head of the Japanese Institute of Middle Eastern Economies, which is known as JIME, and at the center of JIME Center at the Institute of Energy Economics, IEJ, in Japan. This is a very well-known institute in Japan. He has occupied several positions, among them the chair of the Iranian program of the Japanese Institution of Middle Eastern Economics. He was political affairs officer at the UN, special mission to Afghanistan, and worked with the foreign ministry as a special assistant to the political affairs at the Japanese embassy in Iran. Tanaka-san will be talking, Tanaka-sansei, I'm sorry, I have to get it right. Tanaka-sansei will be speaking about the impact of the Ukrainian crisis on energy security in Japan and the role of Arab Gulf states. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Baabood, for extending the kind invitation to be here, and also thanking the organizer for this very insightful and stimulus conference after 3 years of absence from the scene because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, having said that, I would like to also extend also some sort of a wish for the success of the FIFA World Cup matches to commence next month. And we will be observing back in Japan of the matches. Unfortunately, I won't be able to travel here, but I'll be following the events from there. Now, to begin with, one important aspect of Japan's energy security lies that we are located on an isolated island. And we are not connected internationally with any sort of a pipeline, nor are we connected to an international grid. So not only that we import most of our fossil fuels from abroad, we are totally on our own when it comes to our energy demands, how to meet them. So having said that, the paper that I'm going to submit, well, actually haven't finished, but we'll try to deal with how the Ukrainian crisis would likely impact on Japan's energy security matters. And of course, it's not only confined to energy, but I believe that there is an important role that the state of Qatar and other GCC countries as well could play when it comes to securing our energy demands. I don't have any slides to show here, so I will just be talking through my notes. Now, the brief history was already mentioned and presented splendidly by my colleague here, Matsuda-san, so I would like to skip most of them. But one thing is that for power generation, from the 1970s, we have switched mostly from oil to coal, and mostly out from oil and coal to natural gas. The initial, shipment of LNG came to Japan from Alaska in 1969. 1977 was the first year when the UAE, Abu Dhabi, provided us with LNG. And for Qatar, it was 1996. And one other aspect of the shocks that we had, experienced in the past was, of course, the 1973 oil embargo, not to forget that. And the Japanese government, since then, have been trying to diversify the oil sources away from the Middle East. And at the year of 1987, it became to its lowest ever since the Second World War, and it was still at 68%. Now, today is 92%. So it makes a big difference, but still, even though what we ever did, 68 was the least that we can get, okay? And the second sort of shock or a wave, a real shock that we experienced was the 2011 earthquake and its aftermath, where the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear reactor failed and the disastrous accident happened. And from that year and next year, all nuclear reactors existing and also operating in Japan were suspended. All of a sudden, we lost the main source of power generation. And to compensate that, thankfully enough, a state like Qatar was capable of providing us with extra LNGs on the spot market as well. So two major shocks: one, the 1973 oil shock; second, 2011, aftermath of the 2011 earthquake. Now, having said that, there's supposed to be, or it appears to be, that the third shock is now at our doors. Major blowback, the third shock is, of course, the Russian aggression against Ukraine and the necessity that we are now facing to reduce our energy reliance on Russia. The Japanese government / private sector do hold concessions on both oil and gas in Russia. Although oil and natural gas in Russia. Although the imports of oil and coal from Russia has been suspended so far, LNG is still coming into Japan, and this is one source that we cannot totally ignore, even though we are supposed to lead the G7 states starting next January, and also be part of the Security Council starting from January 2023. It may run contrary to what the other G7 states would opt to, but the Japanese government is still adamant on preserving the concessions that we hold, both on oil and natural gas, meaning the Sakhalin projects, the former Sakhalin projects. At the same time, it's not only but Japan, but also other industrial states, along with the third world countries and developing economies, along together are now facing the challenges of global warming. And based on the Paris Agreement of 2015, we are now trying to, well, not only reduce the carbon emissions, we are trying to neutralize it. The Japanese government is committed to achieve that by 2050. I believe a lot of Gulf states are committed by 2060 or so. Intention here is also, of course, to reduce it as soon as possible. And the Japanese government has made an additional commitment under the Suga administration that by 2030 we will reduce it by 46% compared to 2008. And that is a big, big challenge. Still, then, how are we going to secure our energy demands? That remains to be a question. The Kishida government administration recently came out quite strong in its commitment to first reboot as much as possible the existing nuclear reactors, which has now come down to 33 in total. Prior to that, prior to 2011, we had 54 operational reactors. Now it's down to 33. But in reality, there's only 6 today that is generating power. Now the government wants to see at least 10 working, and of course next year up to 17, but still half of the entire requirement. Now, are we capable, based on the long-term energy strategy, as we refer to as the Strategic Energy Plan, which was only revised just a year ago, October 2021, that we would be still counting on nuclear energy, but we will be adding more to the renewables to compensate for natural gas, or lesser use of natural gas, or diminished use of natural gas, and even coal. Now, would that be achievable remains to be a question. And based on the current conditions, are we capable of rebooting those nuclear reactors or not? And even beyond that, the government is now opting to extend the lifetime of these nuclear reactors, which was originally designed for a 40 years period for operation, up to 60. And even apart from that, to build additional reactors based on new technologies, next generation reactors, fast breeding reactors, small modular reactors, so on and so forth. All looks, well, maybe not entirely promising, but still a lot of scientists and industrialists are working on it. Problem here, they're not fully developed. They're not on the streamline yet. There is no commercially viable reactors of this kind on Earth yet. The earliest that we foresee is that by 2040, or maybe by 2050, that these reactors could be fully commercially operational. Until then, there remains to be a gap that needs to be filled in by something to generate power. Would the renewables be enough? Or will we still be relying on fossil fuel, like natural gas and others? And that is the question that hasn't been answered yet, although we are quite close to, first of all, 2030 for the initial commitment of reducing 46%, and eventually to carbon neutrality by 2050. The role of one important aspect when we talk about LNG importation to Japan is that, yes, we had a long-term contract with the state of Qatar, we had a long-term contract with UAE and others, but the one governmental organization named the Fair Trade Commission suggested that the previous contracts were, let's say, against domestic law or against the interests of the consumers inside Japan or domestic consumers of Japan. They have suggested for a revised version of the contracts, which ended up to nowhere because the suppliers have their own interests in preserving the normal contracts or the common contracts that they have used for years. The infamous destination clause, as we call it, and also the take or pay contracts that have forced a lot of Japanese companies to finally, well, reverse the idea of expanding or extending the contract, long-term contracts, are now opting for spot markets. One reason now we are facing sort of a mini crisis, much smaller than the ones that the Europeans are facing, but still will have a grave impact on the Japanese economy, is the higher prices of utilities, electricity bills, gas bills. And of course, the vulnerability or the volatility of the spot market of both oil and, of course, natural gas has resulted or may have a graver impact than we have expected in the past, or when the long-term contracts were terminated unintendedly. Now, whether or not the renewed contracts will be possible, that remains to be seen. But as my final word, I would like to state here that there needs to be some sort of a solution to be played, not only by us, but also with our partners here in the region, and our expectation is quite high on the state of Qatar to step in. Now, carbon neutrality is a major issue. We cannot ignore that the, say, financial institutions are stuck with this ESG mindset. So in the end, we cannot rely totally on just importing LNGs or natural gas. It's more to diversify the use of LNG into other methods or through other methods, like expanding the use of ammonia, blue ammonia or blue hydrogen, where there could be a possibility of extended financial assistance and technical and industrial cooperation associated with that. And another issue, CCS, coal capture storage, or even CCUS, carbon capture and storage, or carbon capture usage and storage, CCUS technologies could also be developed jointly and also with the cooperation of a lot of oil and gas producers, including Qatar, that would eventually be beneficial for both sides, meaning the consumers and the producers of fossil fuel. My final word will be that there is a role that the state of Qatar could play, not only in the energy market, but also in the political arena, where the balancing and mediating role or act could be beneficial for the entire region. Now, we are an ally of the United States. You are also a friend and ally of the United States. But sometimes we do face differences over energy issues. The United States is self-sufficient in energy. We are not. And the state of Qatar requires also markets for your energy resources. So we could work together, I believe, in a way that what we really fear is not a state or an entity that is going to act rogue or to cause problems. It is about the entire region that could be engulfed in flames if a state falls into a quagmire, a large state falls into a quagmire, and that negative effect or a spillover is going to engulf the entire region. If it's going to, say, affect the entire Gulf, it won't be about one state siding on the northern shore of the Gulf, or it won't be about the southern shore. It's going to be about the entire region, and of course the Strait of Hormuz and beyond. So a middle power could play a role today. I mean, of course, geopolitical, negotiations or geopolitics were mainly fought and played by major powers in the past. But today, it could be played by a medium state or middle powers that has connectivity here and there, and also has the wish and will to see a stable region. And I'll stop here. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Tanaka-sensei, Professor Tanaka, for explaining the dilemma of the energy security that Japan finds itself in, and it's unfortunately been compounded by COVID-19, but also by the decision of Japan at some point to move away from long-term contract to spot. And of course, the Ukraine crisis was unexpected and kind of changed the whole equation. So the challenge is huge for Japan, but also this brings, where there are challenges, there are opportunities as well, and this brings challenges for a middle power like Japan to play a very important role in its relationship with the Middle East, with the Arab countries, with Qatar in particular. But let me move very quickly to our last but not least speaker, Satoru Nakamura, who's an associate professor of history and politics at Kobe University in Japan, where he kindly invited me last week to speak to his class on the effect of the Ukraine crisis on the Middle East. And he was a visiting researcher at Qatar University in the fall of 2014. He has authored a number of publications in the Arab Gulf and has edited several books, including Preventative Diplomacy in the Middle East Region, that's published by Shin Sasha in 2012. He's going to be talking to us about, is a new chapter in Qatar-Japan relations on the horizon in the light of the Ukrainian crisis? Professor Nakamura.
Yes. السيد رئيس الجلسة والزميلات وزملاء الأعزاء السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Blessings of God to be. My name is Satoru Nakamura, and I'm very happy to be with you today. And I would like to thank all the organizers for organizing this important and wonderful forum. I prepared my presentation in English, so please accept my apologies for delivering it in English and not Arabic.
Explained so many aspects of Japan-Arab relationship. I will try to go through very quickly. As ex-ambassador introduced, Japan-Qatar celebrated 50 years of the relation today, this year, and embassy staff in Japan, Japanese embassy staff in Doha will have chance to explain more to you. As I want to confirm that all conflicts and shocks, earthquakes, every time Japan and Arab try to expand our relationship, confirm them, and oil shock, Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, we overcame all hardships. And now, not because of Ukrainian war, but since some years ago, Qatar and Japan has been go through revision and reconstruction of a relationship. My framework is this. Partner A and partner B will construct relationship A and B. Suppose A is Japan, suppose B is Qatar. If partner B is changing political economic structure and also role conception, like B1 to B2 and B3, the relationship will be AB1, AB2, and AB3. And if Japan is changing the role conception and political economic structure, A1, A2, A3, the relationship will be A1B, A2B, A3B. And then what was happened? After the independence of Qatar, Qatar was already oil exporter, and Japan imported Qatar's oil. The relationship was earliest friend, each other. And then Japanese consortium, private companies installed large-scale LNG export facilities first time in Ras Laffin, Qatar in 1995, and then Qatar became LNG exporter, and then each other recognized as strategic partner. And then now Japan is changing to be carbon neutral innovator, and then Qatar is going to be what? So I would like to ask your comments and would like to learn Arab perception, and then try to consider with you together what will be the next relationship. And security aspects, Japan has been pacifist and then ad hoc participants in security in the Gulf. Like Iraq's invasion to Kuwait, Japan was take a very, very big role. Also after September 11th incident, Japan had another role. Qatar has been protected by hegemony, but also sent dispatch troops to Saudi Kuwait border at Iraq's invasion and protected Saudi border against Iraq's first attack. It was a very great achievement, and Japan, Qatar has been paid mutual respect each other. And then Japan is now constant participant of patrol, surveillance, and peace building in this region, and Qatar is now playing regional or global player, and then each other recognized as strategic partner. Now Japan is changing to be power center in Asia. I would explain it. And then Qatar is going to be what? And then the relation is going to be what? I would just confirm briefly the distribution of power in the world. Of course, almost half of military spending is spent by the United States alone. And then the distribution of wealth in the world, what will it be? This is data provided by World Bank for the 2020. The United States was still the leading country. And then EU came out, and China is this. Yesterday, the Professor Kupchan pointed out China and Russia may be converged into one side. China and Russia is like this. Is that converging or not? It's a problem we are going to check, yes? I would skip most of my talk over Qatar-Japan relation due to the shortage of time, but I published my survey at Gulf Studies Center at Qatar University as #2 monograph. If you can have opportunity, please check it. But let me confirm, how was the first friends each other? This, of course, you know the current Doha on the right top. And then the center, this is right after the independence of Qatar. Doha was empty. And then Sheraton Hotel, of course you know that. It was built in 1978. And then, what is this small point here? Very tiny. That was Embassy of Japan, built ahead of the Sheraton Hotel in 1974. This represents how they are first, early friends each other, definitely, I believe so. And then now we create multi-dimensional diplomacy. Royal families have excellent relationship, governmental diplomacy, very good. And citizen diplomacy, they like each other. See how Qatari students enjoying Japanese culture. Also, president of Chiyoda Construction Company shakes hands tightly with Qatar Gas president. I will skip stories of human being development or support to Qatarization, but just briefly confirm that why the North Field, the largest gas field of Qatar, discovered in 1971, did not start exporting its gas up to 1996. Why? And how it began? It was Japan's achievement to install large-scale gas facility, first time in Qatar. See, the British companies in 1977 trying to develop LNG facility and started fire, and then they withdraw in 1980s and 1990s. But Japanese companies started after 1985, finally achieved construction, and then began export to Japan. Japan opened the LNG market for Qatar, and then you know all the story. This was not the easy story. At the time, Qatar suffered financial crisis also, not only armed conflicts surrounding Qatar, but Japanese remained and completed. I skip this. And Japanese people are appreciating Qatari's aid at the earthquake. East Japan great earthquake hit in 2011. You know, Qatar provided very swift and very sweet aid present to Japanese people, victims of this earthquake. Qatar constructed fishery processing facility very quickly, within 1 year, only within 1 year. And people started their industry again, and one film director recorded everything in the film, and it was on screen and not DVD. So we remember your friendship lasting forever. So Japan is ready to support Qatar's development. I'm sure Qatar achieved economic development, social development, and human development. And what about environmental development? I think this is an issue you have to tackle with it. Japanese Prime Minister, current Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, is very, very powerful Prime Minister. He set up so-called GX Council, Green Transformation Council, and presided over twice in this summer. And it is said he is planning to invest $1 trillion value for this sector, energy and carbon neutral. What about Qatar? I find that all the debates are open in the website of Prime Minister's office, and I found one that what a president of electric company made a proposal how it will proceed by 2025, 2030, and 2050. See, oil will not be reused; it will be end. Also, because of Ukraine war, we will increase use of coal and LNG for a while. However, it will decrease it will end by 2030. We're gonna finish up LNG because of carbon neutral. And then we will start CCS, Professor Tanaka mentioned. We're gonna invest in hydrogen electricity generation, of course, renewable and nuclear. Methanation, I will skip, maybe this is too much detail. However, I can find some new technology is more promising. Maybe because maybe some like nuclear fusion power generation, not nuclear fission power generation. Maybe seaweed biomass, maybe methanation. Methanation uses CO2 as energy source, not the waste. And then offshore power generation. Our Ministry of Industry is pointing out its plans to generate electricity equals to 40 nuclear generations. It is very powerful. So I can point out the high technology of hydrogen in Japan is the most advanced in the world. Our city Kobe, west part of Japan, is a city for hydrogen. We already set up hydrogen port, and then the hydrogen tanker succeeded in carrying out hydrogen from Australia to Japan. Prime Minister Kishida attended the opening ceremony and celebrated it. And then we have hydrogen reservation tank, and the Kawasaki company is now almost ready for gas turbine and gas burner. We have Toyota is on selling hydrogen car, and we have hydrogen gas station. So a lot of Japanese private companies are tackling for this new carbon neutral, but I don't find any catalyst participation. Japanese private sector is working with Malaysia, Australia, US, and Peru, but not Qatar or the Middle East yet. So I proceed to the security issue. Can I? Yes. Thank you very much. Yes, yeah. Already, ex-ambassador pointed out free and open Indo-Pacific is the key for the region, how it's gonna be done. But I just emphasize that the India-Pacific concept is maybe strange for you. Is it possible or not? But it was not initiated by the United States. It was Japanese Prime Minister Abe who invented this concept, Indo and Pacific, to unite them together. And then why he invited the United States? Because United States is unreliable. Because we cannot leave United States alone, it will be very risky. Because so he invited to India-Pacific region and tried to control him. So the west part, Arabs are located in west part. What they're gonna do with this new emerging regional concept? At least Oman and Iran are member states of Organization of Indian Rim region. Just to take a note, Japan is center of largest free trade zone in the world. And Japan is not balancer. Japan doesn't set threat or enemies, but just trying to be a defense stabilizer. In the Pacific region, it's not only about political economy. Certainly, yes, Japanese self-defense force is making exercise with India, Australia, and the United States. It's true. But it is building network of firm defense, not making any offense to others. I think if China wants to join in this concept, we will welcome it. I skip all stories, backstories. I would publish maybe Japan and the Middle East relationship coming soon, hopefully. I'm working with Dr. Abdullah. Please check the other stories behind in Afghanistan or Persian Gulf, other things. But for the future, Japan is now, Britain, France, Germany, NATO, and India is coming to Japan. Now Japan is a power center. Britain did exit EU, and then it's turned out to try to be global power again. And then Asia is of course key for Britain. Now, so Japan's so-called Britain's tilt to the Indo-Pacific. At the first stage, Britain concluded FTA with Japan and Vietnam quickly, and then UK sent Navy carrier all through Mediterranean, Red Sea, Indian Ocean to Japan. It is determined to build security in East Asia and the Indian Pacific. UK's goal, UK's foreign minister just last month told that India Pacific is more crucial because of Ukrainian war. Because of Ukrainian war, Asia is more important. France regards itself as strong sovereign power in the Indo-Pacific because France has territory in the South Pacific and in the Indian Ocean. So it's believed it's Indian power, Indian Pacific power. And so many French officers told that Japan is the indispensable partner in Indo-Pacific for France. France sent Navy ships to Japan and made exercise with US, Australia, and Japan together. And then also, France was the first country which made land army exercise with Japan after the United States. German published government policy guidelines on the Indo-Pacific region, and it says Germany is making an active contribution to the shaping of international order in the Indo-Pacific. Germans dispatched Air Force and Navy. See this Eurofighter, German Eurofighter. It is painted many national flags, not only Japan, Korea, and others. It's determined to participate in Asia's order. NATO's commander visited Japan this year after the beginning of Ukrainian war. And then Japan now this year worked naval exercise with Turkey and Iran. I would pose a small question to you. Is NATO Western organization? Of course, the name is North Atlantic Organization. However, is it Western power? Because Turkey is a member state. Is Turkey Europe or West or Middle East? Turkish people, yes, some of them regard themselves as Europeans, I don't. But some elements of Middle East is there, yes? And the Asian partners, NATO has Asian partners, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Mongolia, and Pakistan. So they have some Muslim elements there. So NATO has global reach. And Indian Blue Navy, Water Blue Navy, now India has their own carrier. And then they dispatch Navy fleets to Persian Gulf for surveillance. So they are taking new role. Of course, they make exercise with Japan. So, my conclusion, just maybe 3 minutes possible? Sorry for this. Maybe I should jump to conclusion, but I conclude, yeah? So China is regarding Muslim as threats. Why Uyghur genocide is going on, it is because, excuse me, where was it? I don't know which is the right side. Because of pipeline of oil and gas to Central Asia, they are making genocide in Uyghur. Also, Chinese government leaving Myanmar government for genocide of Rohingya because of pipeline of gas and oil to Indian Ocean. So my suggestion, what will be the relationship? Japan is going to be carbon neutral innovator. Of course, Qatar is going to be carbon neutral innovator partner, of course. So new phase of cooperation may be opening or can be surveyed, maybe, possibly. And security aspect, Japan is now turning to be power center in Asia. And then what's next for Qatar? Arabs should take winner's side, not loser's side. So they should be in network within defense partners. So the conclusions. So carbon neutral partnership is, and also defense strategic partnership will be next stage. And we should take winner's sides together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Nakamura, for pointing out the history of Japan-Qatar relations and also taking us through the development of Qatar natural gas to also security and security, especially Indo-Pacific security, and how Japan can play a very neutral role. So I'm sure there are lots of questions, and I will recognize people as I see them. And let's start with you first.
سؤالي لمستر تاناكا طبعا
Tanaka. I would like to know, there was a request by Japan and other countries who import gas in order to divert some ships to the EU. Also, there was a request from Japan or to Japan, addressed to Japan, to divert some of the ships towards the EU because the EU is suffering from energy. And you talked about the contracts and the impact on the consumers in Japan. Don't you think that there will be a competition between Japan and the EU countries that are in need for gas, and maybe the contracts will go to EU and not to Japan? The second question is to you, sir. So, regarding the Qatar file, Qatar did not take steps to protect the environment, but this is wrong because everything that you mentioned regarding environment was before Ukraine war. Many things changed after the Ukraine war, after the gas crisis. A lot has changed. This is why the COP26 that was held in Glasgow and will be held in Sharm el-Sheikh next month, things will change. In 2041, there will no longer be putting an end to reliance on oil, or not even 2050. There are new arrangements that need to be taken into account, and Japan is going to be impacted, as you have mentioned. The return to the nuclear, it was not there. EU actually introduced nuclear as part of the green energy. So this is a reaction. This is why you need to reconsider the engagements vis-a-vis the environment. So when it comes to Qatar. Thank you. Please introduce yourself very quickly in order not to take a lot of time. Abdul Malik Hinay from Oman. I have a general question. Anyone of the panelists can answer the question. I have two questions actually. The first one, why did the relations between Japan and the Gulf in general and Arabs more generally, where are they restricted to importing energy, oil and gas with fluctuating prices, and exporting goods and commodities with increasing prices throughout the years? Is it the result or because the policy of Japan after World War II restricts Japan from establishing larger relations, or is it the result of the slowing down of the economy of Japan in a way that Japan is not capable of investing in industries and education and health sectors in the region? The second question, does Japan have independent relations vis-a-vis the Middle East issues from the United States, or does Japan echo what is decided in the United States? Thank you so much. So here, microphone please. إذن سؤالي هو
Introduce yourself so people know you. And yes.
أنا الدكتور ظافر العجمي من الكويت. Mr. Kazuto, you mentioned something about the concession of oil and the Khafji oil field between Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, and the Saudis ended the Japanese concession. What about the Kuwaiti? Are you still with the Kuwaiti concession, or that's changed? The other question is the former ambassador to Japan. He mentioned the maritime Japanese security in the Gulf, and he was talking about the CTF Coalition Task Force 150 and 151. And that's, we can describe it as a free ride, as the American put it. So how come the Japanese does not have a security theory or security idea for the Gulf? Thank you. This is my question.
شكرا جزيلا. هنا في الورا لو سمحتي اثنين
الخليجي أو منطقة الخليج. شكرا. شكرا
The
جزيلا.
public policy student at the DI. My question is to Professor Tanaka. First, I have two questions actually, one about hydrogen and one about gas. First, you mentioned that Japan is investing in hydrogen in the region. And I was wondering, because the EU has been structuring gas contracts on two phases, a short term on gas and a long term on hydrogen. So I was wondering if Japan would engage in a similar process. And another thing is that we've talked about PPP platform, and if that is possible for hydrogen as well between the GCC and Japan. And the question on gas is that you've mentioned that destination clauses are the main problem behind not renewing. JERA has not renewed with Qatar, for example. I was wondering if the AUKUS diplomacy has not played a role as well in trying to nudge Japan towards Australia and in turn nudge Qatar towards the EU market. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next to you. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the speaker. My name is Yusuf. I'm from Oman. I have one very straight question. I mean, can we expect or can we see a paradigm shift on the source of energy from oil and gas to hydrogen? How soon? The expectation. And number two, to look for the future's relationship and phase two. I think it's need to revisit our understanding that GCC, the only place for exporting crude oil and gas, and to as a place for Japanese products. Looking to that, GCC is transforming currently, and they have multi challenges in terms of their moving toward away from the oil and gas and to create jobs for their nations.
Yeah, it's clear. Thank you very much. Please, yes, go ahead.
شكرا سيد الرئيس عبد الرضا.
Mr. Chairman, Abdullah Rida Asiri from Kuwait. I will be speaking in English. لقد استمتعت ب
But I have a question. There has been accusations all along the history that since Second World War II, you had no independent Japanese foreign or economic policy. You've been independent in the United States. The turning point was 1990, the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, which you take some active policy. Are you still intaker or giver? Japanese would like to take rather than give. And now you have, with the charts and presentation, you are, your role either in military or developmental policies worldwide has been minimal.
Okay, clear.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Last question here.
شكرا دكتور عبد الله.
Dr. Abdullah, I have three quick points. The Sultanate of Oman today announced the... Please introduce yourself. So, Mahmoud al-Nobli from Oman. So, Oman today, specifically in the coming hours, will inaugurate a Hydrogen Oman company, and the Sultanate announced 2 weeks ago carbon neutrality by 2050 and a sustainability center for Oman. So I think that the Sultanate is headed in this direction, in addition to Japan, as you have mentioned, carbon neutrality in 2050. So what about the demographic aspect in Japan, which is the reduction in birth rates? Did it affect the economy of Japan? The third question, the economic decision-making or political decision-making in Japan, is dependent on the approval and conditions by the United States? Thank you. Then سؤالان إضافيان.
No more men, please. If there is a female, I will take one, please.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بروف حبيب الله التركستاني. Thank you very much, President Abdullah. My question to Mr. Kazuto Matsuda. He's a PhD program student, and I would like to ask him why he chose this topic. why you choose your topic about the Gulf region, and what is your methodology? Is your research disk research or it is field research?
Okay.
For Mr. Koichiro Tanaka, good morning. I wish if I hear, we know that the relation between Japan and the Gulf, it's excellent, and we know that, and everybody read the books and literature. But I would like to hear today, what is the opportunity? What is the new opportunity to be active between Japan and the Gulf regions?
Clear.
For the new vision, 2050. We don't want to depend all our theory according to Ukrainian problems, which is just now. We need to have something for the future. And that's my point. Thank you.
Good question. Thank you. Last one there, please, because we don't have much time unless there is a female. Too many men.
It's a structural problem.
Yes.
My name is Tom O'Donnell. I work in energy and geopolitics. I'm an American, but I work in Berlin. And my question is to Mr. Tanaka. I'm very interested in your comments about Japan's nuclear program. I happen to be a nuclear physicist. By comparison, in Germany, they have I would say, an ideological problem. They've closed 14 of 17 nuclear plants. The minister, who happens to be a Green for energy and economics, says in July, said this: we don't have an electrical crisis, we have a gas crisis, which he got quite a bit of criticism because obviously they're linked. And so at the very end, the prime minister, the chancellor had to intercede and order the last 3 plants be kept on to April. It makes no sense to me. These plants are perfectly safe. They're generation 2, of course, perfectly safe, could have ran for another perhaps 3 decades. They're amortized. And I would say the same thing. I know in some detail what happened at Fukushima, and the German plants were shut off before Merkel's cabinet in 48 hours, before they could really know what happened in Fukushima. It was not a failure of the nuclear technology per se, but of, et cetera. It was a major tsunami. So why does Japan not simply turn these plants back on more rapidly? Is this also an ideological problem, political problem, that the government can't deal with?
Good question. Okay, very last question for a female. If there is one round, one quick, can't see you. No hands up, okay? If there was one, because they haven't been, yes, do you want to ask a question? لا ما في كلكم رجال حرام خلينا نسمع صوت نسائي يلا. Yes, please go ahead quickly.
Hi, my name is Isra Al-Isa from Kuwait University. I have a question regarding the hydrogen program that you have. Now, we all know that hydrogen requires extensive oil to produce the hydrogen to start with. And I've seen the photo of you having the big cars transporting the hydrogen. This is disastrous from my perspective. It could create the risks that are there is much more than nuclear. Like when you have these cars, besides, when you create these hydrogen vessels, the amount of metal that you would require to avoid this kind of explosions would cause metal depletion that is not sustainable for future generations. So you would need oil to produce this hydrogen, and the safety of it, having it across the roads is disastrous. And even if you want to expand this technology to come to the Middle East with the heat that is emitted from the streets, is also a big concern.
Thank you.
So this is
good point.
Yeah. So what I think is what you're doing is that you're regionalizing the pollution. So you're having your country to be carbon neutral So the carbon is not emitted in Japan or in EU, but it's emitted where the oil is produced to make the hydrogen. So you're just shifting, it's burden shifting to other countries. Okay. That's what I think.
It's clear.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Last question from the social media. It says, هل يمكن, if you're listening, هل يمكن دمقرة الطاقة النووية في ظل احتكار القوى التقليدية من عبد النور
nuclear energy. So he's speaking in English now. هل يمكننا إحلال الديمقراطية في
or something like that, quick translation. I'm not good at translation. So basically, we don't have much time because we're eating into the break time. I want to give you like a couple of minutes each to who wants to go first. Yes. You can take any questions that you like. You don't have to answer all of them, whatever you like, but please be quick, 2 minutes.
Yes.
2 minutes.
I would answer that Japan's policy is affected by the US decision. First, Japan's never participated any arms conflicts or wars in the Middle East. Japan never joined such battles. This is the very, very, very big difference with the United States. Japan never committed any genocide of Muslims in the world. Also, this is very different from some other countries. This is the point. Also, since yesterday, you are pointing out that United States is unreliable at the Aramco's attack in 2019. What our Prime Minister Abe did? He visited Tehran and met with Hatami. He is very, very brave. No other leaders in the world did that. And then he confirmed with the diplomatic method that Iran is not willing to another military clash. It stabilized the region. I think at least not only because of Japan's attempt, but with cooperation with other countries. Of course, all Arabs, United States, including United States presence, is unreliable, but it contributes some, maybe in simulating the conflicts, but also the impact is very complex. For example, so this is just one example, but Japan's other contribution to clean all Iraq's mine split by the Saddam Hussein, Japan cleaned everything after the Persian, the Gulf War in 1991. It was Japan which did clean everything. Other example, in Afghanistan, Japan disarmed military factions of Afghanistan, which led success of Afghanistan election. Finally, Afghanistan collapsed, but Japan can take unique role, which the other countries cannot conduct it. Also, this is maybe enough. Last one. Yeah, somebody asked the hydrogen with picture like this. So quickly, I would listen to the experts of energy session in the afternoon. I would learn more, maybe. Okay. I think that's the way. But I believe Japan's plan is using carbon neutral energy source to create green hydrogen, or with cooperation with Australia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Shall we go to you, Professor Tanaka? Yes?
Well, thank you for all the questions and comments. I really appreciate that, but I don't think I have enough time to answer all. Regarding the contracts that we had to terminate with the state of Qatar back in late 2021, it was possible because we didn't see that the war in Ukraine was coming. If that was to come, if we knew that was coming, I believe that the companies or even the government of Japan may have a different idea of preserving the long-term contracts rather than opting for a, say, short-term or even a, spot market tendency like that. With regards to the hydrogen issue, yes. Well, I mean, it's not oil that we are going to use. It's mainly gas, natural gas, and also photo PVs, electricity that is generated by photo PVs that eventually would, say, generate, well, actually produce hydrogen out of water. Problem, yes, of course, the transportation and also the storage is quite difficult and also troublesome. So it's not mainly about the vehicles that we are going to use. It's more about it's going to be injected into power stations to generate electricity in the end. So it's sort of an ideal way of first and also to with the combination of CCS or CCUS to capture carbon and not to have it, say, emitted into the environment. So that would not pollute any, well, ideally, it would not generate any sort of a pollution regarding the hydrogen productions. With regards to the nuclear power plants, well, of course, back in Japan, we do have an ideological problem, not only about Fukushima, but from World War II period. So there is a sort of an allergy amongst the society that we consider that nuclear is dangerous. And not to forget that not like the European states, apart from Italy, we are quite sensible of major earthquakes. And it could happen anywhere on the land of the Japanese major 4 islands. And that is going to be a problem. And the regulation states so that the final say in rebooting or restarting the nuclear power plants lies in the local governments, local authorities. And if they don't agree to that, even the government does not have a final say, could not force them to reboot. So that is the current condition that we live in.
Thank you, Tanaka-sensei. And let's move to Sunaga-san. If you're online, do you want to say something? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. Well, I'm enjoying the discussions today. Somebody addressed a question to me regarding the maritime security policy of Japan. And I think, of course, the US is a very important ally for Japan, but everywhere in the world, Japan is acting on our own in accordance with international law and the domestic law as well. For example, in the Gulf region, when the chemical tanker, which is called Kokura Courageous, operated by a Japanese shipping company, was attacked by somebody in the Gulf of Oman in June 2019. Then soon after that, the government of Japan decided to conduct the intelligence gathering activities by the Japanese Defense Forces by Japan's own initiative to ensure the safety of Japanese vessels there. So in general, the Japanese maritime policy toward the Gulf region is very simple: to safeguard the free and open navigation, safe navigation in the Gulf region. And the Japanese, as I said, are acting on our own always. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Kazuto, do you want to answer very quickly?
Yes, thank you.
Because there are some things maybe you can talk during the break, but you don't have to answer everything, because I think everybody is waiting for the break.
Okay.
Go ahead, very quick.
Well, just to be very quick, why did I decide to work on this particular topic? Because I found out that there's unfortunately a small number of Japanese Gulf experts in Japan. Despite the strategic importance of the GCC states, as I mentioned, for Japan's energy security in particular. And I thought my background was experience in the Japanese Foreign Ministry, in academia, and also my language ability to understand, to be able to incorporate the Japanese sources into my research. I thought I could fill in this particular gap that I see in the current Japanese academia. That is the primary reason. And also there's a social demand of the research on Japan-Gulf relations, including in the private sector, as well as policy circles. The second question about the Kuwait, what happened to Kuwaiti side of Khafji. The oil concession of Japan's oil concession was supposed to end in 2003, but Japan's oil trade cooperation with Kuwait continued beyond this year. And just one last thing about the question whether Japan is dependent on the US for its economic and policy decision making. The answer is no. It does, however, to some extent, take into consideration US's security presence in the region, because Japan cannot provide hard power security towards the Gulf region, but Japan does, as I said in my presentation, assume an increasing leadership and agency in formulating its approach towards the GCC states. How? One thing is the public-private partnership platforms that I mentioned. Other ones is Japan's comprehensive partnership diplomacy that Japan has signed, that Japan has made an agreement with the GCC states over the past 10 years. And this comprehensive or strategic partnerships with these states is not about hydrocarbon trade. It goes beyond that. It includes non-hydrocarbon trade sectors, such as cultural corporations, economic investment, trade corporations, beyond oil sectors, new energy, such as hydrogen and blue ammonia. Also human exchanges, academic exchanges. One example is the cooperation between Waseda University, where we have Dr. Abdullah Baabood, and Qatar University. We have a Qatar chair. We have a chair of the state of Qatar for Islamic studies in Waseda University. That's one example that was initiated in 2000. It was initiated, formally inaugurated last year. So that is some examples of Japan's non-hydrocarbon commitment towards the GCC states, and it's not. It was Japan's initiative. It's not affected by it. It was not the U.S. telling us to do what we should do towards vis-a-vis the GCC states. No. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I think the topic is very important. I'm sorry we ran out of time and we eaten into your break time. And this is why we think it's very important that we have this collaboration between Waseda University in Japan, where there is the State of Qatar chair for Islamic Area Studies, and the Arab Center for Policy Studies, for Research and Policy Studies here in Doha, to work on this very topic, the relationship between Japan and the Arab world. This is going to be an ongoing project that we hope that we will embark on, and this is just a start of this, and thank the Arab Center for collaborating with us on this particular topic. I think the colleagues here tried to answer some of your questions. Some of them we couldn't answer perhaps because of time. There will be break time, so you could approach the speakers and talk to them if you want extra information. Unfortunately, Sunaga-san won't be able to join us. He's in Tokyo. But we wish you all the best and speedy recovery, and thank you for joining us. And please thank with me the speakers here, and thank you all.